Closed captioning of this program is made possible by the Fireman's Fund Foundation.
This week, was big money the big winner in Tuesday's primary election? Two wealthy Republican women won their races, while voters rejected heavily corporate-backed Proposition 16 and 17. The voter-approved Proposition 14 for an open primary will likely be battled in court. And the candidates hit the ground running for the November elections. Also, the emotional charge BART shooting trial is underway in Los Angeles. And the mobile wars intensify as Steve Jobs unveils Apple's new iPhone in San Francisco. Coming up next. Good evening, I'm Belva Davis. Welcome to This Week in Northern California. Joining me tonight on our news panel, Josh Richman, legal and political affairs reporter with the Oakland Tribune on what the election results mean for the future. Tom Vacar, consumer editor for KTVU News on the newest iPhone and the mobile devices war. Bob Egelko, staff writer for the San Francisco Chronicle on the BART shooting trial. And starting with Carla Marinucci, political reporter with the San Francisco Chronicle on Tuesday's election. So Carla, you've said on this program that voters are angry. So what would you say, who's going to benefit from that frustration?
Well, I think that's the question going forward until November, Belva. It's who are they angrier at? The political insiders, the Jerry Browns, the Barbara Boxers, or are they angrier at the corporate insiders, the Meg Whitmans and the Carly Fiorinas? And that's how I think both of these parties are going to cast this election. We saw that there's no doubt about it. This is going to be an epic battle in California, and the whole country is going to be watching it because so much is at stake for the Democrats, for Barack Obama, if the Republicans can get these two seats. So Meg Whitman, big win, and that's why you saw her and Carly Fiorina together on the front pages of many newspapers, not only around the state but across the country. This is Silicon Valley women and Republican women, first time ever for the Republican Party. They haven't even had a woman to chair the party, never mind to be nominated to these kind of seats. So this is going to be, I think, one of the most interesting and unusual political battles we've seen in both of these seats. When you talk about Meg Whitman, someone who has never run for office before, versus Jerry Brown, who's trying to get back the job he had 35 years ago, in age, in money, in political experience, in outlook. The contrast is just huge between these two, and there's a definite choice in terms of how they're going to run the state.
Wasn't there used to be an old saying that experience counts? In this case, does it count too much?
In this election cycle, no, the voters are saying experience doesn't count really. We're seeing it across the country. They want fresh faces. They want, they're angry at the incumbents. The question is, Jerry Brown is such a political chameleon. He's already casting himself as a political outsider, saying he has the insider's experience, but the outsider's mentality.
Doesn't this really change the public face of the Republican Party in California forever?
Well, it does. In the Republican Party going up and down, their whole ticket, they got a huge makeover. This was a white guy's party for a long, long time, and we saw Meg Whitman, Carly Fiorina, we saw Abel Maldonado, a Latino in the lieutenant governor spot, Damon Dunn, an African-American for Secretary of State. Right. I mean, that's a huge change for them. And it's kind of interesting and ironic that they're the party this time that's going to be able to have the Rainbow Coalition, and the Democrats not so much.
Yeah, and building on that, I think it's also worth noting that perhaps not so much with Fiorina and Whitman, but in some of these down-ticket races, the Republicans this time are fielding some people who are somewhat more moderate in their policy stances than the party usually puts forward from primaries. You've got Abel Maldonado,
right,
who is not beloved by large sectors of his party, and yet, as the appointed incumbent, was able to carry the primary over Sam Amistad and was much more conservative. That's going to be a much bigger challenge for Gavin Newsom in the lieutenant governor's race than a far-right conservative ever could have been, especially considering he's a Central Valley Latino who brings that constituency to the table. Same thing in the attorney general's race. Steve Cooley, not the most conservative guy in that race by a long shot, not the Tea Party favorite, and yet a big city DA, a Republican big city DA in a Democratic stronghold who's going to bring a lot of that gravitas to the race against Kamala Harris, who comes into this wounded by some of the allegations.
The real question to the both of you is, was this done on a grand plan? Did they start out to do this? Were you all aware that the party was going through this evolution?
I think the Republican Party has come to the conclusion that there are 2 million votes behind the Democrats here in California. They know they have to make some pretty dramatic moves to make up that kind of gap. And you saw with recruiting someone like Damon Dunn, who's a very intelligent, charismatic young guy, former NFL football player, but on the other hand, who never voted until May 2009 in his life.
Yes, but if you look at who his primary opponent was, there was never much chance that he was going to lose this.
His primary opponent was Orly Tates, who was the queen of the birthers, somebody way far to the right, who, the Tea Party folks were just praying that she would be in there. She didn't make it. I mean, for so many reasons, I think that the Republican Party has shifted over, and now they can boast of these 2 women at the top. That is huge. And when we talk about the Senate race, Barbara Boxer has never faced a woman, and not somebody who, Carly Fiorina is somebody who knows how to campaign.
Well, are we maybe overstating this change a little bit? I mean, when did we last hear about the Republicans running somebody for the governor's office who, is running against the politicians, was an outsider, and, well, maybe the vocabulary is a little different, but there's some talk about blowing up boxes and things like that. Golly, it seems like I've heard that before. The face is a little different and all that stuff, and I don't know how well it turned out.
You've hit it right on the money with the challenge that Meg Whitman has, because she even got this from her opponent, Steve Poizner, as you know, Josh. Third term of Arnold Schwarzenegger. She's using some of the very same phrases that he did. That is, I know how to come in and get rid of waste, fraud, and abuse. I'm going to be able to cut, the same kind of things. And this is going to be her challenge. How are you going to be different from that guy?
Well, we could continue that conversation, because we've not said what Jerry Brown is bringing to the table. How is he really casting himself past the fact that he served? And we have the proposition still to talk about.
Well, quickly for Jerry Brown, I think you saw a lot of that yesterday as he appeared with the entire Democratic slate at a solar manufacturing plant in Fremont. Everybody praised him as having had the foresight as governor 33-odd years ago to have laid the policy and some of the bureaucratic and governmental groundwork for the clean energy industry. But then he quickly said, well, let's not talk about 33 years ago. Let's talk about the next 33 years. So they want people to know that he's been here and done this and did it well, but that they're looking ahead, to new technologies, to new ideas, and they want him to be the avatar of that kind of thing.
Yeah, in both parties you saw this week stressing with the campaign sign jobs. It is about jobs for both of them. And the Democrats this week at the event Josh and I were at, both stressing green jobs, high-tech jobs, stem cell research, solar, their drill baby were jobs of the future. The Republicans saying these guys are owned by labor. They're not going to be able to get things done. They're not going to get rid of the regulations that are going to help grow business. That's the argument.
But the very people that need the most jobs is the construction industry, which has been just decimated by this thing. I mean, nice to talk about green jobs, but you got a lot of people out there that need work, and they need the kind of work that they know how to do, skilled labor, construction, stuff like that. Do any of these guys have any real solution for this? Are we going to, because most of the evidence seems to suggest that we're going to be nationally over 9% even through next year unemployment, and that's probably going to be higher in California.
Well, this is where I have to say, both candidates have to come up with real details. Meg Whitman has said she's going to create 2 million new jobs in her first term. 500,000 jobs a year. That's a very big lift, but yet Jerry Brown No details from him yet either exactly on where his job's going to
So
come
tell us
from.
about Propositions 16 and 17.
On the ballot measures, I think the story is a little bit of the converse of the candidate story. Money can't buy you love is the song they should be singing this week. $46.4 million from PG&E was not enough to get Prop 16 over the top because people generally saw it as a very self-serving and very focused plan to protect a power utility monopoly in that case. Similarly, on Prop 17, the auto insurance measure, $15.9 million from Mercury Insurance could not buy a win in this case. It goes to show you that money really is the gateway to get something onto the ballot. It is not necessarily the solution to getting it passed. You have to have a message that's working with people, and I think PG&E went into this as a wildly unpopular company for other reasons, perhaps.
The smart meters.
The smart meters.
Didn't help them in the ballot.
Yeah, so money in fact cannot buy you love when it comes to the ballot box on a ballot measure.
Yeah, and
Could the very language that they used in their commercials have been harmful, might have harmed their chances?
Well, they were trying to get nestled down there into people's consciousness with the barrage of direct mail and advertising, and I think it does wear on people after a while.
And in both cases, you had David and Goliath battles going on between the consumer advocate types and the big corporations.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of money against 16.
And they were widely outspent. Both of the consumer guys were widely outspent with both of these, and yet were able to battle back, I think.
But in the end, I think voters voted their own self-interest. They looked at PG and they said, here's a company that wants to have a 2/3 majority vote on any competition that we might have, but all we want to do is get a simple majority to impose that on the public. And you had Mercury Insurance saying this is going to be really good because you can take your discount. When you really read the proposition, said, wait a minute, if you have any break-in in your coverage, they can do crazy things to your rates, and there's really nothing you can do about it.
Yeah. But when, I don't know if money bought love on Prop 14, but some of the same sorts of interests finance that considerably greater than the opposition to the primary measure. You can describe it, but it was pretty well funded and pretty well corporate funded.
Which is going to be an amazing thing to watch as this unfolds. I mean, I think first and foremost, everybody should know there's going to be lawsuits. I mean, this is not going to just happen, as intended. But yeah, funded by the Chamber of Commerce and by Governor Schwarzenegger, in part by his dream team and such. I think people, I think this was a symptom of people really being upset with the way that government is functioning. And anything that they were told would shake that up was going to be popular. I'm not even sure a lot of people really grokked what this does, but it does something, so they reacted well to it.
Well, we're going to have to move to a trial in Los Angeles where people are upset. That is the family of Oscar Grant, a young man shot in a BART station here. That trial of the police officer Messerly started this week. Bob, you've been covering that. Why was the family so upset?
Well, I got to say, I'm covering it from a distance. We have a reporter, Damian Bull, on the spot who's briefed me, and I've tried to follow all the coverage, and I've followed the case before. But to return to your question, why were they upset? Because the jury that was sworn in to hear this case includes no African Americans. Oscar Grant is black. Johannes Messerly, the officer charged with murdering him, is white. Does this matter in terms of the verdict? Hard to say. There's no particular scientific reason to think that black jurors will vote different from white jurors or Hispanic jurors, and there are 4 Hispanics on this jury. Where I think it could matter is the credibility of this verdict. If Johannes Messerly is acquitted, and his defense in this was he thought he was using a taser instead of a gun when he shot Grant on the back on New Year's Day of 2009. If he's acquitted by a jury that includes no blacks, by one that, in a case that unfortunately, to my perspective, is not being televised, that's being tried in Los Angeles because of the tensions in Oakland, the prospect that jurors would have to walk through picket lines and so forth. The judge didn't want to take the chance of, jeopardizing the right to a fair trial. If he walks, and, who's to say what the evidence is going to show? There are going to be many people in the Oakland minority community who say, Simi Valley all over again. We saw what happened that time.
What's so interesting about this case is the number of onlookers who had the cell phone coverage. We're seeing various cases here. Oscar Grant himself took am I right?
Yes.
I mean, explain what he had on his phone.
Yeah, the frame that was shown during the opening statements by the prosecutor, David Stein, was a photo, a still, taken by Oscar Grant of Johannes Messerly there with his taser out of his holster and looking at him, which I think the prosecution will use as saying, he'd already taken the taser out. It looks different, it feels different, it's on a different hip. He knew the difference. And in fact, there was also a video that was shown during the opening statements that showed Messerly looking at his holster. Now today, Friday, there was testimony by at least 3 people who took videos of the scene. And boy, there's a lot of videos
There's a lot
in
of
this.
video here.
All of whom said they did not see Grant apparently resisting. This is going to be a big issue because the defense will be a lot of resistance, a lot of chaos. Someone heard Messerly say, "I'm going to tase him." He thought he was doing it. There'll be expert testimony by the defense saying the sort of taser panic, taser confusion, and the like. Well, the evidence from the prosecution today was no sign of resistance by Grant. And in fact, there's also going to be evidence that when Messerly got back to the police room, he didn't talk to a colleague, mention anything about tasers. He will simply say, thought the guy had a gun, which kind of supports the idea that he really did know he was shooting him.
Didn't his defense attorney said that in his arguments that he thought that his client thought that
that it was a taser.
that Oscar Grant had a gun.
Or that he thought that Grant, at the very least, he couldn't see his arm, that he was struggling, he was resisting. Michael Raines, the defense attorney, said he fought him for 12 seconds. Well, we're going to see dueling videos and freeze frames, or the people covering the trial are going to see them. And who's to say? Another interesting thing we don't know is if Messerly is going to testify. I think he will. I mean, it's just an inexpert guess. I think the jury is really going to want to hear what this guy has to say. Most times defendants don't testify because of the possibility of what might happen during cross-examination. But Raines has already talked a little bit about this guy's life, the 28-year-old, the most huggable in his high school class or something like that. This sounds like a setup for Messerly taking a stand and saying, here's what I thought, and let's see if the jury believes him. If they do, he might get acquitted, or at least it's possible that there'd be only a manslaughter verdict because of the taser. They might think that the taser was an unreasonable reaction.
It's kind of interesting because, I mean, this has so much to do, the defense has so much to do with what was going on in Messerly's head at that moment, which would seem to compel some sort of testimony as to that. But at the same time, you're going to have this extreme agonizing deconstruction of all of these videos on a frame-by-frame basis to the point that the jurors may be sick of seeing this video in freeze frame for 3 weeks in a row.
I think the jury very much will want to hear from Messerly, which doesn't say that that the defense will present him. This trial is going to go on for 3 or 4 weeks. One other interesting point that Damien made in his coverage, which I was interested in too, was this is hot stuff here. In Los Angeles, it's not a case that people know very much about, or maybe even have come to care very much about, at least so far. I mean, who's to say what will happen as the coverage goes along? There's a demonstration scheduled for Monday. There's not a lot of electricity in the air on this one just yet. The courtroom has been full, but it's a small courtroom, mostly media and Grant's family.
As our reporter down there, Paul Rosinski, observed this week, most of the crowd is headed to Michael Jackson's doctor's trial down the hall. Once that
All right.
gets started.
Yeah.
All right, fair enough.
And there was one point of controversy when the judge ruled that Oscar Grant's past arrest could be used.
Yeah, I mean, the defense wants to make the point that he was the kind of person who might resist arrest because of his record. It's interesting because Messerly didn't know anything about his record. Nonetheless, the judge said that that you can show this to bolster the defense case that he did in fact struggle. And the videos, from what I'm told, it's hard to draw a conclusion. We'll see a lot more freeze frames and experts. Yeah.
Interesting to note that I covered this earlier this week that BART changed its taser policy completely in the wake of this, and the chances that this will happen again are greatly reduced, but clearly they felt they didn't have the right policy in place.
Well, Tom Baker, we've been talking about phones and how people are using them, and this time it was for the video. But this week, Steve Jobs was around presenting his new iPhone, and that's supposed to intensify the whole war of these mobile devices.
That really...
what's it called? The iPhone?
It's the iPhone 4. I think the real story is the war that is going on. It's already fully engaged. But every time Steve Jobs comes out with some miraculous device, initially the original iPhone, competitors look at it and they go, my God, we need to do something about this. And now we're starting to see a bunch of smartphones. In fact, of the 230 some million cell phones out there in the public, 46 million of them already are smartphones. And these are phones that are basically mini computers that have many programs called applications that you can either get for free or buy for these things. And there are really at this moment 9 major competitors, including the iPhone. There are 9 others. There are things like the BlackBerry, the Motorola, Blackflip, the Droids, the Evo. All these things are out there, and all these companies are jumping on the bandwagon because they know that the public is quickly gravitating towards this kind of device. They have cameras. They have all kinds of other things. Now, in the case of the iPhone, it has gotten so sophisticated that you have to begin to wonder, these phones getting a little too smart? Are they getting a little ahead of themselves? Because in this case, one of the things that was touted was that the new iPhone has video editing capability. You go out and you shoot something, and then you edit it and you make your own little program. Well, I got to tell you something. Most folks have trouble just shooting the video. Now putting it together and editing it is not going to be something that's going to be a big audience grabber for these phones, and yet they become ever more sophisticated with ever more kinds of activities, and as a result they are highly customizable, but at the same time they're very confusing to a lot of people, and there are an enormous number of them.
And at the same time we saw, I mean, how can anybody, there's so much bandwidth and everything being taken up with this. We saw AT&T say people are going to be put on a diet. They can't, they don't have the capacity to handle iPad, iPhone, and everything else.
I mean, here's an iPad.
Yeah.
Here's an iPhone. All of these use a very, very precious thing called bandwidth. And what that means is that even Mr. Jobs, when he was showing this phone off, there were about 500 people in this audience of thousands that actually had active laptop computers going, their iPhones and all this stuff. Well, they were eating up so much of the bandwidth, the demonstration that he wanted to make couldn't happen because it basically slowed it down and shut it down. He absolutely turned around and asked the audience, will you please turn your device off so I can demonstrate this? Well, it says 2 things. Number 1, it shows you how really attached we are getting to these things. And number 2, it is a shot over the bow, a warning to everybody that unless we increase the bandwidth and the number of nodes that are out there, that we're going to just head for a big traffic jam. But having said that, the appetite for these things at $400, $500, $600. Now, in the case of the Apples, they're a little bit less expensive if you get a contract. But the point is, people are willing to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on these things in order to have these customizable mini computers. And as a result, this is one of the most important industries, so much so that Apple Computer is now worth more than Microsoft, if you can imagine that.
That's amazing.
This was a company that was on life support not so many years ago, and now it's worth more than Microsoft. So it tells you that the smartphone wars are fully engaged, and they're engaged in several ways. 1 has to do with the phones themselves. 2 has to do with the carriers offering all kinds of deals. And then 3rd is a little bit more muddy thing, but it's really important. It's called the operating system, whether or not it's going to be available to just about any developer who wants to make these apps for these things, or if it's going to be like the Apple system, which is fairly closed. You have to kind of go according to their rules. On the other hand, Apple has 225,000 apps. Nobody else in the business comes even close. So it's an enormous war that's going on.
So this is the nearest I've gotten to an iPad. Many people are saying they don't want to travel with their computers anymore. They just want to travel with this little thing.
Well,
that's only been out a few weeks itself, or months anyway.
Well, the thing that's interesting about this is that maybe for folks my age and maybe a little bit younger, this is a nice thing to show pictures or little things that you might have done. I'm in the media business, so I do that. But I think for younger people, they look at this and they say, this really could be my computer. And if that's the case, then that's going to completely revolutionize the computer business. When this first thing came out, I wasn't so sure it was going to be successful. Now I can't imagine how it cannot be successful.
Okay, the war is on.
It is.
Lots of devices. There's more than an iPhone out there that can do wonderful things, and there are people out there that are going to try to show us all what they can do.
And plenty of stuff online to compare them.
Okay, well, my thanks to all of you for joining me here tonight. And now some other stories from this week's news. It's getting harder to get into California state universities, and it's getting more expensive as well. Next week, the CSU Board of Trustees will vote on a fee hike that could be as high as 10%. And on the labor front, Local 2 hotel workers staged a 3-day walkout at the Hyatt Regency in San Francisco this week. And it took a court injunction to keep RNs from the California Nurses Association in the Bay Area from going on strike yesterday at 5 UC medical centers over staff-patient ratios. Meanwhile, laid-off auto workers from the NUMMI plant in Fremont got some welcome news this week. They'll receive a $19 million federal grant for retraining and for support. And in the arts, the Lorraine Hansberry Theater has canceled its spring and summer season following the death of co-founder Quentin Easter. The historic San Francisco Theater is dedicated to showcasing the works of African-American artists. A memorial production in Easter's honor will be held on Monday evening at 7 p.m. at the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. Well, that's all for tonight. Next week, we'll cover the highly anticipated closing arguments in the Prop 8 trial. Until then, visit kqed.org/thisweek to watch complete episodes and segments of our program, subscribe to our newsletter and podcasts, and share your thoughts about the show and our stories. I'm Belva Davis. Good night.